Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Vishal Dahiya, and this week we will discuss India and Russia's alliance against terror. India's relationship with Russia has been very strong since the Soviet era. This year marks the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations between both countries. But relying on the past might not be enough for both in the changed geopolitical scenario. This week saw two senior ministers of the NDA government visiting Russia in a bid to take forward the relations between both nations. While External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj represented India at the SCO summit in Russia to discuss regional security scenario, Home Minister Rajnath Singh signed a lot of agreements during his three-day visits this week to further strengthen the bilateral cooperation to combat terrorism, extremism and radicalization. However, Russia's attempts in the recent past to expand its relationship with Pakistan and China and its renewed engagement in Afghanistan is an indication of the new geostrategic environment in South Asia. So what effect these developments might have on the combined fight against terror and security scenario in the region? For a detailed discussion on this, we have with us three distinguished guests in the studio today. Let me introduce you to them, starting with Mr. Vivek, Katju, former ambassador to Afghanistan. We also have with us Mr. Sushant, Sareen, senior fellow of VIF, and we also have with us Mr. Yatish, Yadav, the deputy editor of New Indian Express. Welcome all of you to Rajya Sabha television studios. Let me begin with you, Mr. Katju, straight away. If you look at the entire gamut of relations between India and Russia, there has not been much upheaval. We have had steady relations till Soviet era. Then those guys were busy sorting out their own stuff after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then after that, we've had, cordial relations with them. Of late, there has been a drift towards United States in terms of India's foreign policy. But now it seems we're catching up with Russia. So all these agreements which are being signed and all these initiatives which are being taken by the Indian government, is it adding on something new to what has already been done, or is it just revisiting the old ties we had?
I think the renewal of the agreements and the visits of our senior ministers to Russia is timely. We've had a comprehensive relationship which has covered the entire gamut of external policy. I remember that even after the demise of the Soviet Union, there was very close cooperation in the security sector between India and Russia. This included Afghanistan. Through the 1990s, it was only the cooperation between India, Russia and Iran that kept the Taliban at bay. And after 9/11, had that cooperation not taken place in the past, after 9/11, the Americans would not have found it as easy as they did in controlling the forces or defeating the forces of terrorism in Afghanistan, but that defeat was only short term.
Yeah, the alternate route which they had through Russia to reach Afghanistan.
No, the forces would have not been there because Masood was killed 2 days before 9/11. And he was the last bastion of opposition to the Taliban and Pakistani designs. Now, over the last few years, as you've noted in your opening remarks, there has been a growing distance between India and Russia on issues relating to India's western neighborhood, also issues relating to the global situation. Though still in crucial areas of Russia's foreign interests and India's external interests, there still is a fair amount of coincidence. So these visits, I hope, will renew the dialogue and make it more dynamic, make it more purposeful, so that we can understand each other's concerns better, because these stances that Russia has taken in the recent past on Pakistan and Afghanistan, I think are not in the region's interests.
Okay, let's take all these issues one by one, as in Russia's stance vis-a-vis China, Pakistan, Afghanistan. Let's bring in Mr. Sushant Sareen from Vivekananda India Foundation. Mr. Sareen, if you start with China per se, because that has been the recent developments wherein we had standoff in Dokla area, and it was being said no specific statement actually had come in from Russia, and not only from Russia, not any other big superpower. It seems that they left it to India and China to sort it out amongst themselves. And then the kind of renewed interest of Russia to expand its relations with China. Is there something to worry about out here for India in that term?
Well, yes and no. I think, with the growing profile of China, I think it's a no-brainer that Russia, which is right on the border of China, would want to expand its relationship. But partly Russia has also been pushed into the Chinese embrace because of the kind of policies of the Western countries. What is the option after all if you start imposing sanctions on the Russians and you try and push them against the wall? Then they were going to open up some new channels, from where their diplomacy could be more effective. So I think it was a natural kind of a pivot towards China by the Russians. But having said that, the Chinese have a lot of interest in Russia because whatever else you might say about China, technologically they are still not on par as far as the Russians are concerned. And so they are pumping in a lot of money in Russia, also picking up technology. So there is also a built-in conflict between Russia and China. It might not be visible immediately. It might come into play a couple of years from now. But as of now, I think if you make a visit to Moscow, you probably see more Chinese than Russians in Moscow, in terms of tourists and other things. So that relationship has become very close. Now, with that relationship becoming close, then naturally on a range of other issues, there will be a certain amount of coordination. Now, whether it is Middle East, whether it is some of the other parts of the world, you can see that the Russians and the Chinese are more or less acting in tandem with each other. Now, that becomes a matter of concern for us because our dependence on Russia to a great extent for our military equipment, and there also we have a major problem in terms of getting the supplies, spares, also getting new equipment from there, and the Russian-Chinese nexus, it does start affecting our interests somewhat. But I think what is more important in a way is that the kind of policies which the Russians are following in the AFPAC region, while the challenges and the threats are similar, what we perceive and the Russians perceive, I think our diagnosis of the problem is very, very different. Okay. So the Russians think that the IS is a bigger problem in a place like Afghanistan, and they have bought that lemon which is being sold to them, that the IS is the big guy in Afghanistan and we need to support the Taliban to get even with the IS. Okay. The second problem is that because the Russians and the Americans have a tussle, this factor that the Russians are seen to be supporting the Taliban, maybe not as much as the Pakistanis, but nevertheless they are supporting them, becomes an issue because then it becomes part of the geopolitical kind of tussle between Russia and America, and we in a sense tend to get a little squeezed because of our relationship both with the Russians and with the Americans. And so because of problems are certainly
because of our security concerns in the region as well, vis-a-vis Taliban, IS and the entire Afghan theatre. Let me bring in Mr. Yadav here on taking it from where Mr. Sareen is left. In terms of the Afghan theatre and the Russian involvement in the entire issue which has been pointed out by Mr. Sushant here. In terms of our security needs and our interest in the region, is it, feasible or rather wise enough for us to go along with what Russia's plan are in the Afghan theatre in terms of the way they have been giving more focus on, targeting IS and then in some way or the other supporting Taliban?
I would start from where Mr. Katju also left, that in the last 2 years we drifted from Russia, our relationship with the Russian security agencies as well. What we are doing today, like signing the agreements, we could have done that 2 years earlier. But we were pursuing with Americans about getting information from FBI terrorist screening centers and cooperating with American agencies. So somehow we delayed our the engagement with the Russia, that I feel. At the same time, Russians are following their policy that is focused on Afghanistan. They are committing on Afghanistan. They are not committing on Pakistan. Okay. So we have to look at our interest in the region our interest is Kashmir. Our interest is the terror outfit that is operating from Pakistan. As Mr. Sareen also pointed out that, for Russia, IS is bigger threat. They are not looking at Al-Qaeda, or they are not looking at Haqqani Network or TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. So what we need to do at the moment, like Rajnath Singh went there and he had signed an agreement to share the intelligence and other information on terror outfits. So our interest is that we need to engage with Russia on Pakistan more than Afghanistan, because Russia is following the policy to sanitize its own neighborhood, like Alexander Dugin policy, basically, who's a geostrategist in Russia. So we need to focus on our interests rather than what Russia is saying, and we should extract as much as information as we can on the product of that relationship for Russia, what we can.
Okay, quite a pertinent point, Mr. Katju, that we need to focus on what we want actually from this relationship, and obviously Russia would definitely first protect its interests. But what Yatish is pointing out, specifically seeking more information in that particular part and trying to have this particular cooperation with Russia to achieve our own targets, securing our own interests in Kashmir with Pakistan as well. Is that possible? Because interest to expand relation with it's not only with China, it's with Pakistan as well. They've conducted they're supplying arms. They've conducted military exercise as well. So it seems Russia is now expanding relations on a larger level in the entire region with all the countries involved.
I think it goes without saying that we need to focus on our interests in any dialogue that we have with any country, including Russia. The problem is that the policy approaches Russia is adopting in Afghanistan is not conducive to our interests. ISIS is a threat. So is the Afghan Taliban. The question is, which threat is more immediate and more important for Afghanistan, for Russia, and for India? The Russians believe that it is the ISIS threat. Now, that is fine. They can believe that. But what are they doing? The fear is that they are actively supporting the Taliban. In doing so, there is a growing contiguity of interests with Pakistan. That impacts on us. So what we need is, and I'm sure it has happened in the past, but now that the ministers have gone, what we need is a more elevated level dialogue where, in the spirit of India-Russia relationship, as it has existed through the decades, we speak with candor and we learn from them about what they are saying about ISIS, and we tell them our fears and apprehensions about this nexus that there is continuing between Pakistan and the Taliban and how this would impact on our interests. Having said that, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, I can tell you that we have to operate at all times in that country as an independent power, an independent actor. That is essential. We should not be aligned
either with Russia or with United States,
or give any kind of perception that India is anyone's camp follower.
That's the next point I was coming to, Mr. Sareen, that as far as Afghan theatre is concerned, because it's now, if not directly, then indirectly, it is aligned to our security interests in the region, and as Yatish was pointing out too, the entire Kashmir issue and the terror groups operating there and the threat from Pakistan, from across the border terror, all this, if not directly, then indirectly is involved with the Afghan theatre. So are you in agreement with the point which Mr. Katju is making, that we need to ensure that we are seen as an independent operator in the Afghan theatre, not aligned with either power or either bloc?
No, in principle, I of course agree with what Mr. Katju is saying, but I think there is a certain practicality to the issue as well. And in a country like Afghanistan, where the Americans are calling the shots, there is a limit to how much of an independent policy you can probably follow out there. So there are those inherent limitations. The Russian crib about India getting close to the Americans, I think is rather disingenuous, because there was a time when the Russians were virtually in the American camp, and that was a time when they frankly had very little use for us. So now if today the Indian policy has shifted, also because India's profile is growing, so we can't and we shouldn't adopt the kind of silly approaches which we had in the 50s and 60s vis-a-vis the Americans. So if we have shifted our policies, I think that's par for the course. But having said that, the point is that in Afghanistan, it's not as though the Russians are not aware that the Taliban are as poisonous an element as anybody else. But partly because of their own geopolitical conflict with the Americans, they are playing those games. The second problem in the Afghan theatre is going to be that if the Russians will continue to support the Taliban and become closer to the Pakistanis, then of course, that suspicious element of suspicion between India and Russia is likely to grow. But again, there is another factor to this. Even in the 60s, the Russians had tried to get very close to the Pakistanis and then they had finally to back off. Even today, look at the Russian economy. The Russian economy is what? A $1 trillion economy today, right? India itself is a $2 trillion economy. So the Russians are getting, in a sense, they're reducing in size. They might have the technology, they might have the global reach, but purely in terms of economic power, they are no longer what they were at one point in time. The second aspect of this is that if they were going to get into Pakistan, they're getting some sweetheart deals of an oil pipeline here, a road there, something or the other. The Pakistanis simply will not have the money to pay them. Neither for the defense equipment which the Pakistanis are looking at the Russians for, assuming that the Russians can supply it to them, and the Russians are going to tempt themselves by trying to lose the Indian market, which is one of the more lucrative markets for the Russians. And secondly, on the infrastructure projects, do the Pakistanis have the money to pay the Russians? I don't think so. And 6 months from now, if and when the Pakistani economy tanks, I think the Russian projects or the Russian interest in Pakistan will probably go back.
Okay, let's bring in Mr. Yatish on this. And Yatish, going back to the kind of agreements which we have been signing, and as I was asking Mr. Katju in the first instance only, that are they effective enough to take forward our interest? You were saying that we've done it 2 years late, but even if we have done it 2 years late, are they effective enough to take forward our interests?
At the moment, I'm a little apprehensive about, the whole, the talks that is happening, because for Russia, at the moment, China is more important. And China has two arms at the moment, which is North Korea and Pakistan. So with Pakistan, it is sort of, trying to take on India, and with North Korea, Japan, which is considered as a close ties with, having close ties with the India. So, and Putin, if you have seen the interviews that he had given to Indian journalists, he never committed anything on, terrorism in Kashmir. In fact, to the pointed questions that whether Pakistan is involved into exporting terror, he sidestepped that question completely. So Russia is trying to assert itself on the global stage at this point of time, and it will look into with China as well as Pakistan, and India will be another, reluctant maybe, partner in that. But the ties are not, as Mr. Katju was pointing out, that we had a deep relationship. It's not as deep, I feel, as it was, 2 decades, 3 decades earlier.
Okay. So does it mean, Mr. Katju, that we need to push a little more? We need to, find more elbow room for ourselves in this entire relationship, so that we can have more importance, more, in the entire gamut of events and relationships which are taking place with respect to Russia than what it believes in expanding relation with China and Pakistan?
I, for one, am not worried about what Russia is doing in Pakistan.
Okay.
There are limitations to that relationship, and we shouldn't be terribly anxious about.
And some of them have been pointed by Sushant.
That's right. So we shouldn't be too anxious. The question is that these agreements are enabling agreements.
Okay.
Certainly, as our profile and role is growing, and given the vast difference that is developing between Russia and the United States, and that is evident. The Chinese are now G2 in a manner of speaking, and they hope to be with the Americans. It's no longer the Soviet Union and the United States and its allies. So there are certain realities, and I'm sure the Russians accept those realities. we were not junior partners of the Soviet Union. I do not believe that we will be junior partners of the United States. But in the game of perception, even if there is a power differential, even if for practical reasons you've got to have a closer connection with the Americans in Afghanistan because they are present there, their troops are there, and they will remain so. And it's in our interest to see that their troops are there. Yet, you can send out clear signals that you are an independent actor.
Okay.
You are not tied to anyone with strings. And that is what I'm pleading for.
Okay.
And there are sufficient instrumentalities for us to achieve that purpose.
Okay. We're running short of time, but quickly before we sum it up, Mr. Sareen, what is your take on this? How do we take it forward from here? Mr. Katju pointed out time and again that we need to have, establish ourselves as an independent actor in the Afghan theatre, thereby implying that we will secure our security interest in the region, specifically with respect to Kashmir and Pakistan as well. What's your viewpoint?
Again, I can't disagree with him, right?
But what more in addition to this?
But I think at least on the Russian plane, I think we need to continue, doing what we are doing, try and bring the relationship back to normal. I think the Russians also have to put in their part. It can't be only that, the Indians have to make an outreach to the Russians and the Russians can keep doing what they've been doing, whether it's on defense, the defense trade between the two countries, or on the strategic alignments which are taking place. Just as India has been very careful to not, take any issue or not join issue with the Russians, whether it's on Ukraine or it's on other parts of the world where the Russians have got involved. I think the Russians need to respect our sensitivities. If that happens, then this is a minor blip, and as you go along, I think that relationship can deepen further. But if the Russians continue to act as though they are the Soviet Union of the 1960s and 70s, one of the superpowers of the world.
That might not work.
That's clearly not going to work beyond any length of time.
Okay, before we close it, let's hear it from Mr. Yadav as well. You raised a lot of concerns on the timing and the effectiveness of the agreements which we are entering with Russia. But then, to take it forward, what more would you suggest than what Mr. Katju and Sareen has already pointed out?
See, I agree with Mr. Sareen as well as Mr. Katju that we need to be an independent player in both Afghanistan and Pakistan region. But Pakistan is using the outreach by the Russians as to the hilt. I mean, if you look at the kind of propaganda that is in Pakistani media about the deepening relationship between Russia and Pakistan, and at the same time, Russia calling Pakistan that, you need to take action against terror outfit, and within a month, going for a joint exercise. So there are some kind of complexities in the relationship, and India need to identify its own interest at the moment and act accordingly and act independently and act like a power, not like Mr. Katju is saying, and that not junior partner of United States or Soviet Union. So we need to be independent.
Okay, we need to be independent. So it is quite clear as of now that we did have a lot of, strong relations with the Russia in the Soviet era, but only the past might not be enough, and we need to make a lot more efforts to try and secure our interest in terms of the security in the region and the fight against terror. You can send in your suggestions and feedback on the email ID, which is visible on your screens right now. We'll come back again next week with a different topic and a different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.